And here we go. Oh, apologies for running ever so slightly late with this Hangout on air. It was entirely me clicking a wrong link, and that's how easy it is to get things wrong. Just to give you guys a quick description of where we are with the big language book club events today. We have so far featured Benny Lewis from Fluent in 3 Months. I have had an hour where I've had a great time chatting to you guys, and I am Kirsten Hammers from fluentlanguage.co.uk, Ollie Richards from I Will Teach You a Language, and Benjamin Hui from French. Together have already been there. I've been around answering all your questions, helping you guys out with your language learning questions. And here I am now with Jared Romey. And Jared is really a massive authority on the topic of Spanish and Spanish language and different Spanish dialects. So hello, Jared, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, hi to everyone. First off, I want to also mention my wife who is here in the room with me. Her name is Diana, and she is really the person that works with Speaking Latino full-time. So it's a joint effort for both of us. Without a doubt, she's the one that keeps me to the deadlines, and she will also be in the Facebook page as we do the live chat. So she'll be involved as well.
Fabulous. So, hola Jared, hola Diana. Hello.
I don't know if you heard her. She was screaming from across the room there. So I guess just real briefly, I'll just mention how I started with Spanish. My upbringing was very typical for most people. I had almost no exposure outside of the United States, other than when I was really, really young. So 5 and under, I lived outside the U.S., but that really didn't do much for me because I was too young to remember most of it. So I grew up in the U.S. I went to a public school in the U.S. I did, the typical Spanish classes 2 or 3 times a week for whatever it was, 45 minutes or an hour a day. Graduated from high school and really didn't have much of a level in Spanish. Went to undergraduate, started working, and that's when I really became involved with Spanish. I had a job in Washington, D.C., and I found that my lunch hours were pretty boring for me. It wasn't a lot of time for me to go out and do, meet up with people or go around the city or anything. And so I would end up having lunch just at my desk. And at one point, the place where I was working, I found out that they offered language classes during the lunch hour, and they were free language classes. And so I signed up for Spanish, and they were fabulous. I mean, the most people we ever had in a class was 10 people. And oftentimes it was 2 or 3 people, and that was daily. So that was 4 or 5 days a week, and I did that for 2 years, and thoroughly enjoyed it. That's where I started learning the Spanish, and then I went back to school. I did an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration, and part of what I did was I had to learn a language, and so I focused on Spanish, and part of the program where I went, we had to spend 6 months abroad, and so I spent 6 months in Mexico and Chile, and then kind of went from there.
Wow.
So, I mean, to me, the important part of that is that I didn't start as a kid. I didn't even really start as a teenager so much. I started in my early 20s learning Spanish. And so, a lot of people ask, well, I'm an adult, can I do that? I had somebody write me the other day saying, look, I'm 57, you and I spoke last year or emailed back and forth last year, and I want to thank you for telling me I could do it because I had so many people telling me that I couldn't learn it because I was 57. I said, well, that's old,
Yeah, I really agree with you on that.
That's ridiculous, ignore those people. They don't know what they're talking about.
The myth of the child language learner being some kind of inborn genius, and the the inbuilt ability to learn languages sort of fading away, and when you're 60 you can't do it anymore, is one of the most dangerous and biggest myths that I have come across. I think it's just, well, I mean, about language learning, not generally dangerous, but it's just, it stops people even trying, which is just stupid. Like, you wouldn't tell anybody, like, oh, you're 60, you can't, you know, like, oh, you're 40 years old, don't bother learning to drive. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. Well, just as a quick anecdote, my grandmother, when she was in her early 80s, started to learn how to do email and things like that. So, you know, she was doing email until she passed away at 97. So, you know, I think oftentimes I would say the people that are telling you that are probably the people that have never tried, and they don't know.
True. Yeah, and there's this big fear barrier. Now, talking about your many books, how many books have you got altogether?
I think it's 12 right now.
Mm-hmm. And what are they about? Are they all about the same thing?
Yeah, they're pretty much all about the vocabulary, the Spanish vocabulary that's unique to each country. And you know, one of the things that I learned in the process, and that I still find a lot of people don't know about, is how varied and different the Spanish language is from one country to the next. Um, Obviously, if you learn Spanish, you're going to be able to communicate and get your ideas across pretty much in every country, but you're going to have a lot of confusions. You're going to have a lot of mix-ups. You know, the same word doesn't mean the same thing in every country. There are, you know, oftentimes each country has their own word for a specific object. One of my favorite examples is the word kite. The word kite, you know, a little kid's toy with the string that flies in the air. You know, it's a very simple term in English. I don't know, maybe there's a second term in English, but nothing comes to mind. In Spanish, there are at least 8 different words, and each word, there's one generic word, which would be cometa, that pretty much every country understands, but a lot of those countries don't use that word. They'll understand it if you say it, but you won't ever hear them using it. And so, you know, the word like in Chile is volantín. So if I say volantín to an Argentine, or I say volantín to a Spaniard or to a Mexican, they're probably not going to know what I'm talking about.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, they can maybe figure it out from the context, you know, but if I just, you know what papagayo means, or do you know what barrilete means? They're going to say, what are you talking about? They don't know. And so I like to tell people, hey, you know, taking into account the vocabulary you're learning is an important issue. If you're going to Argentina to live or to work or to travel, and you're learning Mexican Spanish, you're going to have a tougher time than if you would focus on learning Argentine Spanish in that same time frame.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, this kind of goes into our first question, which is probably one of the core questions people have about Spanish. And just as an observation, I find it interesting that very few people go out of their way to learn Austrian German or Swiss German or something like that. Even though Swiss German is like something I don't really understand as a German native speaker. And I presume Spanish is similar. So Yvonne Ray says, I've got a question. As a Spanish learner, should I stick to one type of Spanish dialect, for example, Argentinian or Mexican or Castilian?
That's a tough question. The answer is not very direct. I would say it depends on what you're going to do with your Spanish. If you are going to, let's say you have an Argentine partner and you're going to go live in Argentina and you want to talk to his or her relatives, then, you know, focus on Argentine Spanish. If you just want to learn Spanish, and you're going to be using it in different countries, the best thing to do is just get the basics there, and then be aware that there are specific vocabularies that you should learn or be aware of before you go to a country, so you don't walk in and you're just completely shocked. My Spanish I had a Peruvian teacher for most of it, and she was pretty neutral, and then I went to Mexico for 2 months and studied there. So when I went to Chile, I thought, okay, this ought to be pretty reasonable. But at that point, I didn't understand how much difference there really was. And so I got to Chile, and I really did not understand what people were saying. And I'd been studying for a while. Um,
Yeah.
it's not just the vocabulary; it's also the intonation, the pronunciations are different. So it's
Mhm.
that whole mix of things. I mean, the answer really is it depends on what you're going to do with the language. Um,
I mean, I have learned, I spent 2 years learning Spanish for business context and writing business letters, and had, for 1 year, had a teacher from Zaragoza, which is how she taught us to say it,
yeah,
because she was, she was real Castilian Spanish. And the
yeah.
second year, I had a teacher from Venezuela. So we had to, and she pronounced things very differently. But it reminds me of that aspect where, because we had to learn business Spanish, it didn't really seem to, a lot of it is written, a lot of it is standard language.
Right.
You write a contract or a letter or a sales something, and a lot of those words didn't vary so much. What are some of the cool differences between the dialect? Like, what's a really cool anecdote or story or observation that you have? That's a question from Chris, our co-host today.
Well, I have one I don't that's kind of funny that it happened between me and Diana one day. And it's really just a kind of a Spanish mix-up compared to English, I think. I was getting dressed, and I always get this backwards. I had my underwear on inside out, and Diana said, she said, you have your underwear al revés, which I took to mean, what was it, inside out. Well, what she really meant to say was I had them on backwards. And so, so it was kind of this language confusion that happened. And that was just a kind of a random day-to-day thing that was going on, and it's kind of goes to going back and forth between the two languages. You know, Even if you're speaking the same language, things aren't always very clear. That's I think
Mm.
that's an important point too. A lot of people worry about making mistakes. They worry about not getting the idea across. But if you remember, think about your native language. It happens all the time that you're speaking your native language to another native language speaker, and they get confused or they don't follow what you're saying. And so, that happens. It's not always happening just because you're a language learner or you're a beginner. It may be happening just because it happens. Um,
Yeah, that's a very important point, actually. That it's one of the, when I do language coaching with people, it's one of the things that I often say, when I notice somebody setting themselves a very high goal, like, I'm going to chat up a beautiful girl in German, and I'm like, do you do that in English? Do you even do
yeah,
that? And it's
exactly.
like, you're not going to magically become a entirely different person, just
Yeah.
by learning a foreign language. But how would people regard you if I'm sort of going to, let's say I'm going to Argentina with my 2 years of school Spanish, which is very Castilian influenced,
Uh-huh.
because I love the sound of the, so I will use it when I can. But how would people regard me? Would that sort of give you a negative? Do people think worse of you for not speaking their
No,
local?
no, no. I'm not, I would say not at all. No, I mean, first off, it's like anywhere else. People are generally fascinated that you're learning their language and that you're taking the time to learn their language. And that's the first thing. And especially if you're a beginner, they're going to understand that you're learning the language. And they'll know that you're learning it in Spain. And so maybe they'll ask you about that or comment about that, or maybe they'll say, "Hey, you gotta try and learn Argentine, or try and learn the pronunciation, or something like that." But
Mhm.
no, people are very open. Where it might cause a little bit of confusion is the vocabulary, because you're going to be using some vocabulary that might be crude or bad, but they'll tell you that real fast. Hey, by the way, that's not a word you use here. I'll go back to Chris's question again and give you another anecdote. I had just moved from Argentina to Puerto Rico, and I walked into a sandwich shop, and I was buying a sandwich, and I said to the girl behind the counter that there was an insect or a bug on the window, just to let her know. Well, I used the word for a guy's thingy um, in Puerto Rican, which is the word bug pretty much everywhere else. So, um, you know,
Wow.
it's a word that you really don't use in Puerto Rico because it's really crude, and it's just the word for insect everywhere else. So, or bug, really. So, um, those things do exist, and in that case, she was a really young girl. She was probably like, I don't know, 16 to 18 or 19. She just kind of turned pallid white and was shocked. Um, but generally, if people have any experience with foreigners, they're going to understand what happened, and they're just going to, say, hey, by the way, that's not really the word you want to be using here.
Oh, that's yeah, but I mean, always you can always tell if what you say doesn't have quite the impact that you thought it was going to
Yeah,
have.
yeah. You can see the reactions and yeah, and things like that for sure.
So I want to ask you about the bundle and the kind of book that you're giving away. And what I find really fascinating about your sort of story is that, first of all, you're very familiar with a continent I've never been to, if I'm counting South America as a separate continent. Um,
Which
and
is a separate debate. Believe me, I've had this debate before. How many continents there are in the world, and
yeah,
that's a big
well,
question.
so you're familiar with a region of the world, let's say it like that, that I don't know at all. So, what is the landscape like between the different countries? Is it in Europe? I feel that when you cross from one country into another, every country has a slightly different flavor to it. Is it similar?
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah. The physical landscape is can vary significantly even from one country to the next. I mean, Chile, for example, is 4,000 kilometers long. So it's about as long as the U.S. is wide. And so in Chile, for example, you have I think, the driest desert in the world, and you have snow, and there's penguins, and mountain ranges. There's all kinds of things there. But if you go from one country to the next, there are a lot of, I mean, yeah, there are major differences. Not just the language, but physically, the people have different backgrounds. Argentines are generally much more European, a lot more Italian influence, Spanish influence. Whereas in Peru and some parts of Chile, Ecuador a little bit, there's more native influence just in the history of the countries. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean there are immense differences from one country to the next.
And did you write your books on the road as you were traveling these different countries?
Um, I lived in three of the countries. So let's see, how did that all happen? I wrote my first book in Puerto Rico about Puerto Rican Spanish. And from there, I think the second book was for Argentina, and I did that in Puerto Rico also. Uh, but I still travel back and forth to some of these countries quite a bit, and so when I'm there, I generally try and keep up to date on any changes in the language. I ask my friends. Obviously, I have friends in these countries, and so I can fire off an email real fast and say, "Hey, I ran across this word. Can we talk about what the meaning is, or something like that?" Uh,
And were you a teacher before you started this?
No, not at all. I probably don't have the patience to be a teacher. I would say I can safely say that. Uh, I was a language learner like everybody else, and what happened was, I had that first initial experience of going from Mexico to Chile. Chile is really where I became fluent in Spanish. I was living there. I was probably 95% of my life or more was in Spanish. I only used a very little bit of English for several years, and so uh, that's kind of where I formed my Spanish. And so from Chile, I moved to Argentina, and I had this shock of this language shock, which was a little strange. I remember one of my first days, I walked into my office in Argentina, and I asked my assistant for a stapler, a pen, and pencil. And she just looked at me, like you said earlier. I could tell she didn't understand a word I said. And she had this blank look on her face, and I had to walk to her desk and pick up each thing and say, "Can you get me one of these, one of these, one of these?" Because basic words like that are very different. Um, and like in Chile, oh, the word for stapler left me, but in Argentina, the word is abrochadora. Um, and the word for pen is in Chile would be lápiz. No, that's pencil is lápiz mina, which is like lead pencil, and in Argentina it would be lapicero. Hmm? Lapicera, exactly. I've got Deanna here coaching me along here, and then like yeah, and then in Argentina a pen is a birome, and in Chile it's a lapis pasta, and so like these basic things, I had to relearn the vocabulary in Argentina. And then from Argentina, I moved to Puerto Rico and I went through the whole process over again. And
Mm-hmm.
I, I was in Puerto Rico and I just started making a list of all these words that I ran across that I didn't know what they were. And, at some point, I don't even know what triggered it, I thought back to this fabulous book that I'd seen in Chile or had in Chile that I owned that was about all the local Chilean Spanish. And I said, you know what? I can do the same thing for Puerto Rico. And that's kind of how it all started. That was a long time ago. That was in 2005 that I published the first book. Uh,
Mm-hmm. And did you self-publish, or I mean, do you? Because at the moment, it grew into quite a large company. But did you start out with a publisher and like get in touch and go through the whole process?
Yeah, it's been a mix really. The first book, the Puerto Rican book, is through a publisher, and the book did really well in Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rico had this curious thing happen in that all the major bookstores closed down. So all the bookstores that exist are kind of smaller bookstores now, and so the book selling industry, the publishing industry in Puerto Rico, pretty much died out. Um, and the publisher still has the book for sale, but really at this point the book doesn't sell much in Puerto Rico, mostly because there aren't many places to sell it. So that book is with a publisher. My Chilean book is also with a publisher in Chile, but the rest of the books are self-published. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, the Chilean book is also self-published outside of Chile. So it's kind of a mix.
Can you just briefly comment on um, being a self-published author versus being a traditionally published, so you've got an actual publishing company kind of, looking after your book for you, and where you see the main differences? Because Benny Lewis commented on it earlier and sort of his thoughts and what convinced him to become a published author as opposed to a self-published author. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the day-to-day, really. We've got a really nice mix of books in this.
Yeah, I mean, first there are major differences. I happen to like the control I have over the self-publishing. There's things about layout that I don't like on my books that were done with the publishers. The drawings, just the style. I mean, there are a lot of things I just don't like about the two books that I published with publishers. Now, the publishers offer things that obviously I couldn't do on my own. There's no way I could publish a book in Chile and distribute it to the bookstores in Chile on my own as a self-published author. I couldn't do that. Now, if you go to Chile, my bookstore or my book is in all the bookstores, and so that's definitely something that made a big difference. I did a hybrid thing in Argentina. I self-published in Argentina and had a friend distribute my book to the bookstores, and that was, it was quite a bit of work for her, and it's kind of worked in some respects and not in other respects. Um, the self-publishing, I would say what's similar about them, it both is the self-publishing and working with the publishers. You need to really market yourself. The publisher's not going to do it for the most part. I would say almost at all.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have to do that in any event. So don't assume that if you have a publisher, you're going to, you're going to have like this book tour set up for you. You're going to have everything coordinated and like that. I saw some of Benny's video. I didn't hear the part where he was talking about the publisher. but I know he's doing just a ton of book events and book tours, different countries. I'm betting he put that together on his own for the most part. It may have helped if he had a publisher to go to some of these bookstores and say, hey, this is my publisher. I can do this. But my guess is he's probably doing a lot of that legwork on his own.
I think to him it was very important to, and it makes a big difference, especially here in Britain, how the media perceives you. So that as a blogger who's published a book, it's a different story to being a traditionally published author. If you want to get on the radio or the breakfast show, or he said he was on Bloomberg TV, and you just don't, you just need that credibility. So it's almost like people still want to hear that someone who has publisher in their title said, I'm good at this.
Yeah, but I think that's changing. I think Benny can go to the traditional media and say, hey, look, I have, I don't know, 500,000 people a month coming and reading about me that know who I am, and so I can talk to you about this, and I've done this and this and this and this. And I think that'll start changing more and more. But you're right, a lot of people still see it as kind of a legitimizing act, which is, yeah, I mean, I suppose. But at the same time, there are a lot of really good books, good ideas, and good authors that don't get picked up by traditional publishers, and then they can do self-publishing, and they go on and have a huge success. I actually, in probably, I'm going to say 2008, I went to a writers' conference, and I spoke with one of the editors for the dummy guides. And I explained to him, at that point I already had, I don't know, a couple books published. So I showed him the books, I explained the concept. He said, honestly, your books aren't really language learning specifically. They don't fit into the language learning category for us, and so it's hard for us to classify them. So your best bet is probably to publish on your own, because you've obviously had some success in some of these countries, but a traditional publisher here in the U.S. isn't going to know how to manage you and how to handle you. So your best route is probably to self-publish, which was interesting for me to hear.
Yeah.
That was a while ago now. That was, I don't know, probably, I'm going to say 6 to 8 years ago when it happened.
And going back to Spanish, but we did have a question. I think that's a really interesting one. In that context, how different is Spain Spanish from Latin American Spanish? Would there be difficulties in understanding each other?
The pronunciation's probably going to be a bit different. The vocabulary is definitely going to be different. But, I don't want to scare people off and have them think that, oh, wow, if I'm learning Spanish in Spain, I'm not going to be able to communicate it. You'll communicate, you will. You're going to have some stumbles along the way that you wouldn't have if you had learned Mexican Spanish while you're in Mexico, or while you're going to Mexico, for example. There's definitely some differences, but at the same time, there's some very big differences between Mexican Spanish and Chilean Spanish or Argentine Spanish, just as much as there is Spanish from Spain compared to any Spanish from Latin America. To me, one of the interesting things that has happened to me, though, is a few years ago, because I was being kind of masochistic, I decided I wanted to read Don Quixote in the original Spanish. Now, at the time that I decided I wanted to do this, I didn't realize it was 2 volumes of like 12 or 1,400 pages each, or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. And I read it. I said, okay, well, I'm going to suck it up. I decided to do this. So I read it, and what I really learned, it was really interesting. I learned that a lot of the old Spanish is similar or the same as the Spanish in Puerto Rico. And
in Puerto Rico specifically?
Yeah, well, part of it is I'm also really familiar with Puerto Rican Spanish, more so than, let's say, Dominican or Cuban. And then also, and I've learned this as well, the Canary Islands and Puerto Rico have a whole lot of similarities in their Spanishes as well. And some of it is kind of maybe conjecture on my part. Some of it I think I've probably picked up reading, but I'm guessing that the conquistadors that came to Puerto Rico early on were probably from the Canary region, and that influenced 400 or 500 years ago. That influenced the language, and that influence has stayed since then as well. So, like I said, I want to be careful, and I don't want to scare people off and think, oh wow, the differences are so vast and major that I'm making a mistake by learning Spaniard Spanish. The most important thing is that you learn Spanish. Afterwards, you can adjust it for sure. It'll stumble, you'll make some mistakes, you'll have some confusions, but you can adjust it. You can pick it up.
And so is that where speaking Latino books really fit into somebody's Spanish learning? They're kind of, you learn the basics, and you kind of, that's you see your value as an add-on.
Yeah, I didn't answer part of your question at the very beginning about the books. The books basically are just vocabulary guides. And so you'll find the Spanish word, and there will be an English definition of that Spanish word. Sometimes there's a sample sentence. They look kind of like dictionaries, but they're a whole lot more playful. There's goofy cartoons, there's funny sayings, and things like that in them. And so yeah, they're definitely complementary. They're not going to be your primary tool or tools for learning Spanish at all. I mean, and it's okay to get it when you're first starting out, because you can learn some of the vocabulary for, let's say if you do know where you're going to be traveling first and you want to learn that vocabulary, then yeah, these will be great, because you'll kind of skip over some of that initial obstacles when you get there, and you've learned a different word for for pen. But they're not going to teach you Spanish at all. Don't buy them thinking. Don't take. I mean, you can look at them. I think all of them have previews where you can look at them real fast. So they're just really complementary tools to help you understand the vocabulary better.
Thanks a lot for clarifying that. Okay, I've got a question from Emma Sibley. She says, I have children that are learning Spanish from Spain, so Castilian, but I have no background in it. Are there any resources that you know of that would be helpful to the children or to her to encourage the learning?
That is a spot-on question. I've had that question 2 or 3 times in the last couple months from people. And the short answer is there's nothing that I know of that is really useful, especially for younger kids, that I would say is free. There are some paid tools out there, but it's an area. And in fact, I had a mother ask me this same question. And I asked, I think, 3 friends of mine who were Spanish teachers, and none of the 3 of them could point me into something really useful. I would say, depending on the age of the kids, I happen to like italki, for example. Italki, you can find some, I think that's how you say italki, yeah. You can find some really inexpensive tutors for kids, and some tutors that that specialize in working with kids, and that might be the way to go. It's going to be really difficult for a parent who doesn't speak Spanish to help their kids out more than just the basics, I think.
It may also be it may be worth getting a tutor for who actually comes to your house, especially when you're working with children.
For sure, yeah. I mean, if you have that option, definitely as well.
You can do more. You can do more tactile things. I think with little kids, particularly. Like I've done it before, where I was teaching a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old German, and we made little passports for them, and so we really basically I just did a load of crafts with them, but in German, and labeled everything in German, and that really worked. So. Games, and Emma, it may be worth sticking around for Becky Morales, who is joining us later, because she specializes in parents who want to help their kids learning language and educate world-aware, kid world citizen, it's called.
And I mean, I want to highlight something you just said, Kirsten, as well. What you want to do with the kids, especially if they're younger, you want to do what you would normally do with them to keep them engaged, except you want to be doing it in the target language. So, if they're going to be bored in English, they're going to be bored in the other language as well. And so what you need to do is you need to keep them engaged in the new language at the same time, which is what you just said, exactly what you did with the passport activity and things like that. Make it fun for them.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder, though, as a parent when you don't know any Spanish. Like, how do you... When your kids know more than you, maybe you can ask your kids to teach you.
That could be a good way to turn it around on them, sure.
That might be really fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Jared, can you take a few seconds to describe the I've forgotten what it's called, the local Spanish bundle that
Oh,
you've put
yeah.
together?
Yeah, the
You.
Speaking Latino local Spanish bundle, I think it is. So that is, it's a package of all of our books. I think it's 12 books, Deanna? 12 books? Yeah, 12 books. Deanna says 12 books. Um, and they cover, again, this is from memory, they cover, I think, 9 different countries. And with the bundle, it is, I'm going to say 70% off right now. And that's just for today. We've never offered this price before. I won't say we'll never do it again, but it's not likely you're going to see it anytime soon. And what you get is you get a PDF and you get a Kindle version of each of the books. And so you're going to have the local Spanish for 9 countries. There's the reason that there are 12 books in 9 countries is a couple of the books have two, or a couple of the countries have 2 books. And I just estimating that's going to be about 6,000 vocabulary words for those different countries.
So it's for at what stage in Spanish learning would you recommend these? Should people be a year into it or just before they set off at the airport?
Yeah, I would say definitely just before the airport, because even if you don't speak Spanish, these books can be useful for you to understand a couple words. I tell people they're great icebreakers. If you can learn 1 or 2 words or phrases, and that's all you learn, you can walk off the plane and talk to somebody, or even if they're fluent in English, say a word to somebody, and they're going to start cracking up laughing because you said something that most foreigners won't know about. And so they're good icebreakers in that sense. Definitely, if anybody is an advanced Spanish speaker, without a doubt. If you're a beginner, they're still going to help you because, like I said, if you have a target country you want to learn about, they're going to be able to help you with that as well. So it really depends on the range of your goals and your time frame as well. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the books are available today individually as well, and all the books I think are $2.99 each. So if you don't need the bundle of all the books, then you also have the option of just buying a book for 1 country if you'd like.
And do people buy them? People buy them directly from your website. What about people who want to pay in different currencies?
I think it can handle all the currencies, right? Yeah, it can handle all the currencies. It'll be converted. You can go on the website. The books are available on Amazon as well. It was just harder for us to manage the discounts on Amazon for a bunch of reasons. But the books, for whatever reason if you want a print version, you can go on Amazon and get the print version also. All the books exist in print versions. They're not just ebooks. The print versions, unfortunately, don't have a discount today, but they are available. So if you want your hard copy, then that's still an option for you. I know that goes against what Benny wants. I heard him say that earlier, but some people still like the print version, so those are available.
Well, it's like I said, old school language learner here. I can't help myself. I start scribbling. So yeah, maybe it's in the run up to this event, Chris and I were talking about these live videos, and I sort of said to him, "Wow, really, do you want to do this many live videos? And really, do you think people will watch them?" And he said, "Well, it's really boring if we don't do that." And I just felt like, God, you millennials, I feel so old. But it's really funny, and I'm actually incredibly glad and grateful to Chris that we are doing this because I'm having so much fun talking to everybody directly, and it's really great to see you taking the questions live.
Yeah, no, this is the first time you and I have spoken as well, although I don't know what it's been,
Well,
maybe.
you are in Fluency Made Achievable.
Hmm?
You are in my book, Fluency Made Achievable, my first one.
Yeah,
I did a lot of expert interviews, and I interviewed you for that, but we didn't actually speak, so you're right about that.
I was going to say it's been, maybe a year and a half or 2 years since we've been in contact.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, it's wonderful to be back in touch as well and to get the community going.
Yeah, no, and this is a great idea. I appreciate that you guys put this together for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Okay. So we have got the link up. It's speakinglatino.com/language-book-club. And that's where you can get your complete and utter fill of Puerto Rican, Venezuelan,
Mexican,
Argentinian,
Peruvian,
Chilean.
Argentine, Chilean, Dominican, Cuban, did I skip
Man.
one? Colombian? That might have been all of them there.
Yeah, all the Spanish ever. Right, let me just double check that we're not missing any questions before I let you get away. But you and Diana are going to be around as well in case people have more questions later.
Yeah, we can be hopping in and out for sure.
Okay, oh, we have one more question. Talitha is a learner of Castilian Spanish. Hey, Talitha, she loved following us all day. It's awesome. She says, as a learner of Castilian Spanish who wasn't at work in South America, I think. Wants to work. Sorry, I had trouble making sense of that then. Who wants to work in South America? So she learns Castilian. She wants to work in South America. Which country's dialect is easiest to use throughout the continent? Is there a dominant one?
I get in a lot of trouble sometimes if I answer this certain ways from Diana. She yells at me. I would say the clearest speakers of Spanish that make it the easiest for foreigners to understand them are probably Peruvians, Colombians, and some Central Americans. Now, I don't know all the countries, so for example, I don't know Venezuelan Spanish that well. I don't know Cuban Spanish that well. I don't know some of the Central American countries that well, but my personal experience, a lot of this is based on my personal experience. Colombians and Peruvians generally speak kind of neutrally in their pronunciation. I would say Peruvians maybe speak a little faster. Now, obviously, I'm generalizing here, so don't yell at me because I'm generalizing. I get yelled at sometimes about that too. You know, this is a touchy subject for a lot of people because they mix up the two questions of what is the best Spanish as being a judgment about a certain country or culture, as opposed to what is the best Spanish for a non-Spanish speaker to be able to follow and understand. And you know, I'm obviously answering the second one. I'm not saying Colombia is better than everybody else or anything. The Colombian Spanish to me is generally clearer. They enunciate really well. And then the other thing they do, which is really interesting, is they really use the difference between usted, which would be the formal you, the formal second person, and the tu version, or the vos version, which would be the informal. You know, a lot of countries mix those, ignore them, they don't use them as much. You know, to me, Puerto Rico is a country that doesn't use a lot of usted. But in Colombia, they really do. You know, there's a marked difference, and as a language learner, that I think it's important for you to learn, even if you don't use it as much or practice it as much. It is important to hear it and understand it. So I would say,
work there.
yeah, and so I mean, I would say generally Colombian and Peruvian are going to be probably your clearest, easiest to understand.
Great. Thanks a lot for taking this answer. It's been so great to hear from you. You know, stick around in case there's a few more questions, and you know, keep an eye on the Facebook group throughout the day. And we're gonna wrap this up, this call, and make space for the next live call, which is going to feature Anthony Metivier, who has written books particularly about memorizing, and he just memorizes like everything, poems, cello, things, or whatever, you know, and Chris is going to be speaking to him. So, cool. Jared, I say muchas gracias.
No, de qué, gracias a ustedes también por hacerlo.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bueno, chao, chao.